Good morning. For those who just joined, we'll just wait 1 more minute before starting the session. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think now we can start. So good morning, everyone. My name is Alexandre Schick. I'm an associate expert working in the human trafficking and migrant smuggling section at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. I would like to welcome you to this regular panel session titled Strengthening Policies Against Organized Criminal Networks Involving the Smuggling of Migrants and Related Crimes Along the Central and Western Mediterranean routes. I'm really glad to see participants joining us online. And I'll introduce the session. So first, we'll provide a glimpse on a rapid data analysis conducted between October 2022 and February 2023 on the links between organized crime and migrant smuggling along the Western and Central Mediterranean routes. This data analysis was made possible thanks to the generous support of France. Then we will have a presentation focusing on the current threats in human smuggling in Nigeria and Chad. And finally, we'll conclude with a presentation of the best practices and challenges adopted in Nigeria to strengthen actions against organized criminal networks that traffic people and smuggle migrants. So before diving straight into the presentation, first let me kindly remind you to please keep your microphones always muted. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So therefore, I would please kindly ask you to write your question in the chat box, as we will not give the floor to participants. For the first presentation, one of our speakers had some issue with one of the flights, so I will present in her behalf. So I'll share my screen now. And you can see it. Can I just ask the organizer if you can see my screen, if it's working?
Yes, it's working.
Great. So I just wanted to introduce this first presentation. So it is based on a rapid data collection that was conducted under a project which was made possible with the generous support of France. The outline of the presentation is as follows. I will first briefly explain the methodology that we used for this data collection. Then I'll provide a short overview of the dynamics of smuggling of migrants in the region, and dive then into the subject matter and present the findings regarding the links between the smuggling of migrants and other forms of organized crime. And I will finish by presenting a few conclusions and recommendations that stem from this data collection. So from the outset, I just want to emphasize that the purpose of the data collection was not to provide an exhaustive analysis or research on the subject matter, but rather to contribute to establishing a baseline of the knowledge base on smuggling of migrants and links with organized crime in the Central and Western Mediterranean route. As you can see on the slide, the geographical scope of the exercise included the countries that you can see. And this was based on an assessment on data availability and the role played along the two routes. The data collection was mainly conducted through desk research of existing open source material, including data from the UNODC Observatory on Smuggling of Migrants. And it was completed by questionnaires and interviews with key informants, again, also with the support of the donor. Then the main conclusion and recommendation were discussed at an expert group meeting under Chatham House Rule, which was held in Vienna the 10th of May of this year. It was also organized with the support of France and Sweden. Now, let me talk briefly about the dynamics of migrant smuggling along the Western and Central Mediterranean route. And first to highlight that there is no single business model of smugglers along the route. So most of the migrants rely on separate actors to facilitate the different stage of the journey, and there's no signal business model of smuggling spanning across the route. There is also no single group dominating the migrant smuggling market through the central Mediterranean route, but rather a variety of actors and groups with different levels of coordination. Now, what about the demand and supply dynamic? So often migrants and refugees travel with facilitator and or smugglers who decide the route. Information shows that people on the move in West and North Africa trust smugglers and perceive them as travel facilitators and assistance providers rather than criminals. Certain parts also of the routes necessitates actually the use of smugglers, especially for crossing the Sahara Desert and entering, crossing, or departing from Libya. We also have emerging data on migrant smuggling by air. So data analyzed points to the presence of organized criminal groups involved in the smuggling of migrants by air based in West Africa. And key informants pointed also to evidence of organized criminal groups operating in Senegal, smuggling migrants by air with networks expanding to Turkey and EU countries. There's also trends observed in Libya over the past year, which show that the country is increasingly becoming an international transit center for migrants from Egypt, Bangladesh, and Pakistan arriving by air. Another aspect also of the dynamic is the independent departures from North Africa. So we observe self-organized departures of migrants, which are one of the main trends identified in sea crossing from North Africa, notably from Tunisia and Morocco. Now, what about the level of organization of smuggling networks? So in general, smugglers operating at land and sea borders seem to be agile, regardless of the level of organization of their groups. And certain parts of the routes involve organized criminal groups with a high level of hierarchy and professionalism, whose activities extend to several countries along one or more migration routes. Now let me dive straight into the subject of the links between smuggling of migrants and other forms of organized crime. So data collection for this paper brought to the forefront the almost lack of evidence of the links between smuggling of migrants and other forms of organized crime. Besides few exceptions, migrant smuggling organizations are generally not involved in other forms of transnational organized crime. The most common link association was between networks of migrant smuggling and trafficking in person. So available data point mainly, as I say, to cases where smuggling of migrants and trafficking in person are intertwined. In West Africa and the Sahel, these conversions most often occurs in a specific location, for example, in gold fields or during specific stages of the journey, for example, in northern Mali or Libya, and most often involves women and children. As you can see on the slide, the following patterns have been observed. So the first one is that migrants who voluntarily depart with smugglers or mobility facilitators towards a certain destination, but find themselves trafficked for sexual or labor exploitation. Their onward journey may resume along the way. And this may involve sexual exploitation in transit centers along the West and North African routes, where women are found in debt bondage for their onward journey. A second pattern is migrant workers who depart voluntarily and use smugglers to bring them to the destination country, where they fall then victims of trafficking by means of deception. So this is the case with some gold miners in the Sahel and the Sahara Desert. Before departures, migrant workers are promised satisfactory working condition, but on arrival, they find themselves in exploitative condition and without the possibility to escape. The third pattern is migrants who fall prey to trafficking network from the outset. This is the case of many Nigerian migrants, especially female, who are controlled by madams and the networks at all stages of the journey. And these networks use debt bondage, among others, other means. And after arriving in Europe, migrants are forced into sexual exploitation until the travel debt is repaid. And the last pattern is migrants who voluntarily depart and find themselves deprived of liberty, detained arbitrarily or extorted. And such cases are systematically reported by migrants in northern Mali, Libya, and Algeria. Here, I just wanted to highlight the factors that seem also to foster possible links between smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons. So the first one is the involvement of organized criminal group. In Nigeria, migrants smuggled from or through Nigeria rely to a greater extent on transnational criminal groups than other West African. And there is significant evidence of highly structured criminal group which exercise end-to-end control over the trafficking process and also involve smuggling of victims of trafficking. The second factor is the transit through territories outside government control. So the lack of regulation and law enforcement oversight can create a window of opportunity for trafficker and smuggler. And this seems to be the case, for example, in the Gao area of Mali, which is an important transit hub for seasonal labor migrations towards North Africa or the gold mines of the region. And the more, if I may say, broader factor is the fact of increased vulnerabilities of migrants, which is caused by poverty, also lack of employment opportunities, and lack of alternative pathways. Let me just now talk briefly about the case of artisanal gold mining. So artisanal gold mining sites are fertile grounds for exploitation, trafficking in person, as well as arms, gold, and tramadol trafficking, and they generate revenues for extremist and armed groups. It's widely reported that forced labor camps and sex trafficking rings may be also rampant in and around illegal mining sites. And gold mining sites serve as a prime example that demonstrates the link between facilitation of regular or irregular migration and the exploitation of migrants. So what about armed groups and smuggling of migrants? So our data collection came across evidence of links between terrorism, the financing of violent extremism, and trafficking in person, as well as link between organized crime and violent extremists, particularly in the Sahel and Libya. Now, what about other forms of organized crime and links with the smuggling of migrants? So there's really little information of links between the smuggling of migrants and other forms of organized crime. Most data points to links between smuggling of migrants and trafficking of tramadol, particularly between northern Niger and southern Libya, or between Nigeria and Libya. And trafficking of this opioid is possible thanks to the transport system that was developed for the transport of migrants. Now, I just wanted to provide with the conclusion that stem from this data collection. So as you can see on this slide, I just highlighted a few. So administrative data on the arrest, prosecution, and detention of smugglers operating along these routes is really scarce. As I mentioned during my presentation, the links between organized criminal groups and migrant smuggling along the central and western Mediterranean routes are limited. The profile and modus operandi of migrant smugglers is also very diverse. And in areas where there are no formal restriction on mobility, such as free movement zone, there is little evidence of migrant smuggling and almost no evidence of links between migrant smuggling and other forms of organized crime. And finally, the absence of legal pathways often actually enables smuggling networks. Now, here are a few recommendations. I will not go through all of them, but I just wanted to mention that in order to counter smuggling of migrants along these two routes, it is really important to understand the crime and establish a baseline, but also to improve international cooperation, improve capacities, as well as legal and policy frameworks, but also regular data collection and exchange and promotion of judicial cooperation are really required. So with this, I conclude my presentation. And I would like now to give the floor to Mrs. Alice Ferreday, who is a senior analyst with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crimes, North Africa, and Sahel Observatory. Alice, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. I will share my screen for the presentation. Just a second. Sorry, just a second. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay. Great. So hi everyone, I am Alice Faraday. I'm a senior analyst with the North Africa and Sahel Observatory at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. My work focuses mainly on illicit economies in the Sahel, and in particular on human smuggling and trafficking dynamics in Niger and Chad. So I will present today some of the main findings from a monthly monitoring program, which is focused on the political economy of human smuggling and trafficking in North Africa and the Sahel, which is funded by the EU. And I'll focus mainly on Niger and Chad. So these are findings from the monitoring over the last 2 years, and in particular dynamics that have taken place in 2022. So in Niger, there have been a few very significant shifts over the last few years. What we've seen is the consolidation of trends that have been underway actually since 2016. So following the criminalization and collapse of the migrant smuggling economy in Agadez, which has led most smugglers or passeurs, as they're known locally, to seek alternative activities. So most smuggling networks in Agadez, which was formerly the key hub for migrant smuggling in Niger, have reorganized, firstly to cater for the very high demand for transport of Nigerian seasonal workers to Libya. So this is less lucrative per passenger, but it's really much safer. So it provides a relatively constant and predictable client base for smugglers who can no longer transport foreign migrants. So this represents a majority of the flows actually that take place between Agadez and Libya at the moment. Another alternative that passeurs have found is in gold mining. So many have successfully reconverted to activities linked to gold mining. So either in providing transport to and from Agadez and Ahlit, for instance, or in auxiliary services and trade that supply the gold fields. On the other hand, there's been a really important shift in the destination country of the foreign migrants that continue to travel through Niger. So we've seen that actually Algeria has overtaken, the movements to Algeria have overtaken flows to Libya. So this is a really key alternative also for passeurs. Routes to Algeria have been somewhat less affected by the crackdown on human smuggling, and departures have really surged, I'd say, over the last 2 or 3 years. So they've really surged in departure hubs such as Tawa, for instance. So I'm showing the map here, which shows the main human smuggling routes through Niger. You can see Tawa, which is in the southwest of the country, we can say, but it's located quite close to the Algerian border, and it's a very significant human smuggling hub now. So journeys to Algeria, although they are still very dangerous for migrants, and they represent really important risks in terms of So not just the travel, but also the expulsions that that people face if they are arrested in Algeria. So there were significant expulsion operations back to Niger, but they're still really popular, and especially among Francophone migrants. What remains of the transport of foreign migrants to Libya now involves different routes. So these routes have evolved to dodge security measures by bypassing policed areas and main towns, and they venture further and further into remote and quite dangerous territories to the east and northeast of Niger. So this includes areas on either side of the main road between Agadez and Dirkou, and also the large stretches of desert to the east of Agadez. And these are routes that have led to numerous deadly accidents and incidents, vehicle breakdowns, which are often fatal for migrants. One particular route, which I can show now, connects the Nigerian border to the Libyan border, and it bypasses all towns. And it uses an exchange point to the east of Agadez, where migrants are passed from one passer network to another in order to connect the two. And that's, I'd say, one of the main itineraries used for the transport of foreign migrants now. And a majority of foreign migrants who travel from Niger to Libya are using this route. But this route presents really significant risks. It also coincides with areas that are targeted by armed banditry. So that's another key dynamic that has evolved over the last few years, and it's increasingly affected human smuggling. Armed banditry has been on the rise in the Agadez region since 2020. It's closely linked to the increasing presence of foreign armed groups in northern Niger and in cross-border areas with Chad and Libya. It's not entirely new, but it has seen quite a significant development over the last few years. It's not just on the rise in remote areas, it's also increasingly affecting main roads in the Agadez region. So the main road from Agadez to Dirkou, for instance, these banditry operations are also taking place much closer to cities and towns. We're seeing an increase in attacks on individuals and smugglers traveling to Libya, even those who are using the military convoy between Agadez and Dirkou. And this is in addition, of course, to the interceptions that target high-value convoys, so mainly drug convoys in the far northeast. And another clear trend linked to armed banditry is the targeting of gold convoys in the region. So that's provided a really highly lucrative activity for armed banditry. So what we're seeing in Niger is really the continued contraction of human smuggling activities between Niger and Libya, while routes to Algeria have become significantly more popular. And we're also seeing a shift in routes to Libya, so routes being displaced to more remote and dangerous areas. Meanwhile, in Chad, human smuggling dynamics have also seen a significant contraction over the last 2 years. So what's important to understand about human smuggling in Chad is that it's really very closely linked to the dynamics in the gold fields in northern Chad. So most human smuggling involves northbound movements to the gold fields. And so from eastern, western, and southern Chad. And these movements, these northbound movements, they involve smugglers because travel to northern Chad has been mostly banned due to the perceived risks of Chadians joining rebel groups in the north and in southern Libya. So most people have to use the services of passers just to reach the gold mines. So these are, for the most part, prospective gold miners, Chadian, but also foreign. Some are individuals traveling further afield to Libya, And some are foreign migrants aiming to travel ultimately to Europe, but those numbers are relatively low. So we can't say that Chad is a sort of key human smuggling hub for migrants traveling along the central Mediterranean route. I think as my colleague mentioned earlier, that the gold mining also presents significant risks of human trafficking. So these movements, especially movements from southern Chad to the northern goldfields, in some case are an example of the complex relationship between human smuggling and human trafficking. So a lot of gold miners travel on credit to the goldfields. We see this also in Niger, and these movements often involve indentured labor agreements. Perhaps we can come back to that in the Q&A. So these northbound movements in Chad have been impeded quite significantly by political and security dynamics since 2021. I will, so here are the sort of the main smuggling routes through Chad. And you can see that a lot of the routes converge in northern Chad and involve movements through the goldfields. So they're very important transit hubs. So since 2021, these movements have been significantly impeded by additional restrictions on movements that have been imposed by the Chadian authorities. This is in the wake of the factor rebel group incursion in 2021 and the subsequent political crisis following the death of former President Deby. And these restrictions have targeted hubs such as Mao and Moussoro, and routes from the Kanem region towards northern Chad, which have been associated with heightened risks of rebel recruitment. On the other hand, routes from eastern Chad have enjoyed more freedom of movement. So from the hub of Abéché, which is to the east of Chad. And northbound movements, of course, have been affected by the events at the Kouribougoudi goldfield. So there was a major upheaval in 2022 when intercommunal violence broke out at the goldfield. This resulted in clashes between gold miners. Then the Chadian military closed the gold site, evacuated miners, and the entire area was designated a military zone. And so most movements then were completely halted. So we really saw a pause in human smuggling activities to northern Chad until the reopening of the goldfield in September 2022. So I think this is a very good example of how human smuggling dynamics in Chad are very closely linked to the situation in goldfields. And so I think I will just end also with a final note on the impact of the Sudan conflict. So since the outbreak of conflict in Sudan, eastern Chad has faced a major surge in arrivals of Sudanese refugees, but also Chadian returnees. This has put obviously very, very significant pressure on already strained assistance capacities in eastern Chad. We've also seen in recent months the movement of Sudanese refugees from eastern Chad to northern Chad and then on to Libya, with some of them also moving further afield to Tunisia. So far, we haven't seen a huge arrival of Sudanese refugees in Niger. This is likely because of there's several factors that could explain this, but probably the fact that the situation of Sudanese refugees in Niger is already very difficult. There's, the humanitarian centers that house the refugees are saturated, and many Sudanese have been trapped in the situation for quite a while because of the delays in processing of their files. So this could explain why people aren't traveling to Niger so much. And also, obviously, since the military takeover at the end of July, that could also have impeded arrivals. So I will end there. Please feel free to follow up with any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alice, for your presentation and insights provided. I note in relation to Niger, the growing trend of armed banditry and the impact it has on the smuggling of migrants, notably attacks on smugglers and smuggling migrants. Also interesting, again, the convergence of smuggling of migrants and trafficking in person around gold mining sites. So maybe, I don't know, but more research could be undertaken on this area. I saw we have already questions in the chat, but as I said at the beginning, we will answer them at the end of the last presentation. So in this regard, I would like now to give the floor to also one of the officials who participated in the data collection I presented, and also was present in the expert group meeting in May. So Mr. Emmanuel Ikechukwu Nweke from the International Organizations Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Nigeria, for our last presentation. So Emmanuel, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Alessandro, for giving me the floor, and also many thanks to the organizers for putting together this engagement, and also for the opportunity for Nigeria to share its perspective regarding the involvement of organized criminal groups in smuggling of migrants in Nigeria and within the Western Mediterranean routes. Before sharing best practice examples that Nigeria have been involved, I would like to provide some comments regarding the presentation on the study that was organized by UNODC and supported by France. First, we think that study was very comprehensive, and that the information shared seems to relate with the experiences that we have in Nigeria. And we also believe that there is limited evidence of links between organized criminal groups and smuggling of migrants. And this is because, in our view, the dynamics in Nigeria, where crimes take almost the same character, and the perpetrators also seem to have some form of collusion. And from our own experience, it is actually difficult to establish the offense of smuggling of migrants in relation to trafficking in persons because of the strong evidence that is required to actually ground an offense of smuggling of migrants. And also, from experience, we found out that people who are actually involved in trafficking in persons, mostly women and children, it is easier to identify. But for smuggling of migrants, you are looking at highly skilled individuals, and also the network would require those individuals to actually provide information for you to begin to trace or begin to go after the organized criminal groups. And having said that, I would also like to point out also that from the study, we agree that not all those involved in facilitating traveling are members of organized criminal group, as a survey that we conducted in Nigeria would reveal, which I am going to share soon. Now, regarding our best practice examples, we've actually looked at our situation in Nigeria, and what did we try to do? We understand that we cannot address this challenge if we do not have, a credible data that will enable us inform policies that will tackle the issues, not just from the root, but have all of the information to be able to look at strategies that will enable us, address it comprehensively. And that was why we decided to conduct an observatory, which was done by the agency in Nigeria that is responsible for smuggling of migrants, and that is the Nigeria Immigration Service. This particular study was done in conjunction and partnership with United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, as well as other development partners. And it was surprising to find out that at the end of that study, we discovered much to our surprise that most of the smuggling of migrants that take place within Nigerian routes and MLR are not actually done by organized criminal groups. In fact, the study shows that only 9% of migrants who are smuggled across these routes actually use organized criminal groups or networks. It is usually done by facilitators, and some of whom actually engage in legitimate business, as it were. And we equally noticed something very interesting, that there has been a downward trend in incidences of migration since 2018. And we have evidence that 75% of migrants surveyed plan to use smugglers or facilitators for their movement, while 21% had thought otherwise. Then what is key is that while 72% of those mentioned in our study mentioned that someone influenced their decision to travel, only 9% attributed that to smugglers. And another interesting perspective is that when we compare smuggling of migrants to trafficking in person, we discover that because of what I mentioned earlier, the nature of those involved, it is easier to find out there are cases of arrest and also convictions with regard to the offenders involved in this kind of crimes. And to buttress this, just in 2022, our Agency for Combating Trafficking in Person, the National Agency for Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, NAPTIP, had 80 convictions on trafficking offenses, while about 27 convictions was already achieved in the first quarter of this year. And also, this report that was conducted by the Nigerian Immigration Service with support of UNODC also fits to the other study that we have carried out now to help Nigeria develop comprehensive strategies to begin to address transnational organized crime in the country. And that is our Nigeria Organized Crime Threat Assessment. Some of the findings from this NOCTA, which was just presented a few weeks ago during a UNODC event in Abuja, revealed that most of the traffickers or most of the victims of trafficking in persons are mainly children and women, and they are usually taken for forced labor and sexual exploitation. And this also supports the findings of the study that UNODC conducted that Alessandro presented earlier. But what is striking from that study was that many of the migrants leaving Nigeria, or many of the victims of trafficking in persons leaving Nigeria, their destination is not actually Europe. You know, they travel more, or rather, most of them find themselves within North Africa, and in some cases, many Asian countries. And regarding the other aspect of our efforts to address this crime, we try to improve our legal framework for addressing trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants. And I would like to inform that following the adoption of the GI-TOC and protocol on smuggling of migrants, the Nigeria Immigration Service Act 2015 was actually amended. And we have from Article 65 to 98 domesticated the provisions of GI-TOC and protocol on smuggling of migrants. And this now empowers the Nigeria Immigration Service to work together with all other relevant agencies to ensure that this form of crime is prevented, and efforts are also made to combat it. And now coming to the other best practice example that Nigeria has also exported to the global community, we were involved in the idea of a liaison magistrate. This liaison magistrate program, which was first launched, the pilot program of the liaison magistrate was launched in 2018 between Nigeria and Italy. This offers an opportunity for us to bring into reality Article 18, paragraph 3 of the GI-TOC in terms of mutual legal assistance, support for investigation and prosecution of trafficking in persons offense, as well as smuggling of migrants. And in the case of Nigeria, a liaison magistrate was actually sent from Nigeria to Italy to actually assist in the judicial process, helping to collect evidence, collect testimonies, support investigations, helping to authenticate documents, and also providing the dynamics within the Nigerian legal system to ensure that offenses of trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants are effectively addressed. And I tell you that program has recorded tremendous success. Since 2018, when that program commenced, the arrangement has facilitated the prosecution of 55 transnational organized criminals and then 27 successful mutual legal assistance requests, and also 4 international arrest warrants. This is evidence of the success of the liaison magistrate project that Nigeria feels that other maybe states in Europe, in fact across the globe, could actually adopt. And then it was not only perhaps Nigeria liaison moving to these countries, it's also important to have some of their officers also move to Nigeria to actually assist with some of the trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants offenses going on in Nigeria. We also view strongly the importance of informal networks of law enforcement agencies as a way to effectively address the smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons. We understand that in a formal setting, without the support of informal networks, it's usually difficult to effectively address this crime. Where law enforcement officers are members of a particular network, it is easier to actually share MLA requests ahead informally and begin to have exchanges before formal requests are made so that these crimes are effectively addressed. And Nigeria is one country who feels strongly about informal networks. And we think that the West African Network of Central Authorities and Prosecutors Against Organized Crime, WACAP, is one example of a sub-regional effort to exchange information and assist with investigation and prosecution of organized crime. And also, Nigeria equally sees value in constantly building the capacity of law enforcement officials, because there is a changing dynamics with the organized criminal groups and networks. And when capacities are built to adapt to these changing dynamics, it makes it easier and effective to address these crimes. And from our own general thoughts and conclusion, from what we've seen, both by the study presented by Alessandro and our own internal experiences, it does appear that the more we try to stifle the regular migration routes, the more we increase opportunities and penchant for migrants to use the irregular migration routes. And that leads to a lot of consequences, including deaths, like we see happening along the Libyan route, like was expressly elucidated by the last speaker. And we see that within the ECOWAS region, where we have a protocol on movement of persons. We no longer see, increased, interest in trying to smuggle migrants across these routes, because it is easier for people to move freely. And we also think that there should be efforts to equally assist developing countries to continue to develop their capacity, especially for smuggling of migrants, the importance of intelligence gathering. Without intelligence gathering, you cannot effectively investigate and prosecute the offenses of smuggling of migrants. So we continue to suggest and recommend for partnership by UNODC and other development partners to pay attention, training and retraining law enforcement officers within this route. So that's our thoughts on the point, and I hope I kept to time. Thank you very much, Alessandro.
Thanks to you, Emmanuel, for this really interesting presentation. I think we heard a really good example of best practices. So I also took more broadly the note on, again, the limited evidence of links between organized criminal groups and smuggling of migrants in Nigeria. I also took note of your point of the need really to gather strong intelligence to establish the offense of smuggling of migrants. It was interesting when you mentioned as well the many migrants who are living in Nigeria, and the destination is actually not Europe. Also, an important point I think that you raise is again the importance of international cooperation notably through the liaison magistrate and also the fostering of informal networks of law enforcement to address smuggling of migrants. So now we have concluded our 3 presentations. So I open the floor for questions, and I already see that people wrote a few in the chat. I'll try to answer a few already. For the presentation of data analysis, the findings should be published quite soon. And relating to the data collection, so as I said, it was based on the literature review and also a key informant interview, so a mix of the two. And we also had support, as I mentioned, from France, who also provided us with important information. I saw also a question, and I think it's for you, Alice. I will read it. So, what is the impact of the coup in Niger on human smuggling and trafficking dynamics there, and how do you see the evolving over the next few years?
Thank you. So, on the question of the impact of the coup, there's several dynamics that we have been tracking over since the coup in the end of July. I think the first point relates to border closures. So we know that Niger's borders were closed, the land borders, and then subsequently several borders reopened, so Libya, Chad, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And the 2 main border closures that have impacted human smuggling is obviously the border with Benin and Nigeria. So there are 2 different situations there, because the border with Nigeria was previously already partially closed, so there were only certain border crossings that were officially open. So the sort of one of the main entry points that migrants use to arrive in Niger and then travel on to Libya, the one that I mentioned in my presentation, that border crossing was already closed, and so the movements there were already clandestine. So there hasn't been a huge impact of the border closure there. Another key entry point, so further west, which connects Sokoto to Birnin-Koni, that border crossing was partially open prior to the border closure. So we saw an increase in human smuggling, so people who were using motor taxis to bypass the official border crossing in order to cross the border. On the Benin border, however, there's been a really major impact of the closure, because basically this is a really key entry point. It's the border between Benin and Niger is a really important route that connects West Africa to Niger and on to Libya and Algeria. And the border crossing there is that it actually involves crossing the river, which acts as a natural border. So what we've seen there is people are resorting to the use of pirogue smugglers, so using the pirogues to cross the river. This activity actually already existed during the COVID-19 border closure. So we'd already tracked the use of pirogues during that border closure between March 2020 and June 2021. And actually, so these are smugglers who are often who are fishermen who own pirogues. A lot of them invested in motors for their pirogues during the COVID-19 closure. And actually, these are the same actors who've reactivated this activity since the coup-related closure at the end of July. And this seems to be tolerated on both sides, because really there's no other way of entering the country in that area. It's also a really significant route because actually bus companies that operate on routes from West Africa to Niger, they all go through this border crossing, including those who connect Ouagadougou to Niamey. So they would previously obviously use the more direct route between Burkina Faso and Niger, but due to insecurity, this route actually shifted. So bus companies that connect Ouagadougou to Niamey now go through Togo and Benin to reach Niamey. So huge flows there, and it's the border closure really had a significant impact. And now bus companies actually will take passengers up to the river, to the bus station. They'll give them instructions on how to cross the river with the pirogue smugglers, and then on the other side they will be able to board buses and continue their onward journey. So that's one point. The other impact, the preliminary research we've conducted suggests that there has been an easing in the law enforcement pressure on human smuggling. And this is likely the result of several factors. On the one hand, it could be due to shifting priorities of security forces, who obviously, due to the political insecurity crisis, and there was for several weeks very heightened tensions relating to the threat of an intervention to restore constitutional order in Niger. So there's likely shifting priorities that mean that people are no longer really able to focus on human smuggling as much as before. And there's also an expectation among the passeur community that actually the new authorities may revise the anti-smuggling law, the 2015 law that criminalized human smuggling. There is a lot of talk at the moment around this issue. It's unclear whether this will actually take place, so I'll refrain from making projections over the next few years. If that does take place, this will obviously have a very significant impact on human smuggling in Niger, which will perhaps reactivate, to the levels that we saw prior to 2016. But for now, there's no concrete evidence that will actually happen. So I hope that answers the question correctly. There is actually another question in the chat. Maybe I can take it while I'm.
Yeah, I saw we have, sorry.
Yeah, there's a question on the profiles of smugglers and whether they come from legal private sector actors, migrant social networks and others. So just briefly on this, in Niger, that basically there are different actors within human smuggling activities. There are coxeurs, who are like the intermediaries who will connect the migrants with the passeurs, and they are often they're often migrants who, former or current migrants who have stayed in a transit hub and who are actually able to make some money by finding customers for passeurs. So they're often from the migrant community. They can also be locals, local people, but also the actual passeurs who organize the transport. They're often local people from the Agadez region or from southern Libya who have knowledge of the routes. So they're never going to be. They're very rarely going to be foreigners who will serve as passeurs, or they can be Chadian, but the most important is that they have the knowledge of the routes in order to organize the transport. So there are several different profiles, but and in some cases there are also people who were involved in other illicit activities, such as illicit gold mining or drug trafficking, but usually these are, people who've actually been transporting people from one place to another for several years, and they usually have that expertise. So thanks.
Thanks a lot, Alice. I also note that UNODC also just published the finding of a project named StarSum, which highlights the scope of transcontinental migrant smuggling from South Asia to North America. And you can click on the link that was posted in the chat by one of my colleagues. I also have another question for Emmanuel, I think, but this question was, I cannot see it anymore, but I think it was in relation to the NIST report, Emmanuel, when it would be published. But this question I think has been suppressed.
Yes, thank you very much, Alessandra. Apparently, because I responded to the question in the chat, that was why you couldn't see it again. I think the question was on whether they could access the observatory that was done by the Nigeria Immigration Service. I just responded that it's also on the UNODC website. And the title is Observatory Report on Smuggling of Migrants, 2022. So anyone interested could access it on the UNODC website. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Emmanuel. I'm also scrolling them through the Q&A. Don't think I see other questions. Or maybe the question again was suppressed. I see a question there from L1. So thanks for this question, L1. And yeah, we'll continue thanks to this data analysis to work on this issue. And also, as this data analysis pointed out to some areas that maybe needs more research, we're also trying to see how we could address these specific areas, notably the gold mining sites and others. I don't know if there's any more questions people want to write in the chat. If not, I don't know if we should close, or I'll just wait a few more seconds if anyone has any other questions. I see another one. So the data, basically, we had the contact with some liaison magistrate who provided some information. And we also had a survey that was shared with these liaison magistrate who could also collect some information that was useful for data analysis. Hope it answered the questions. I see another question, maybe Alice, if you want to take this one. What about smuggled women, risks, and security needs?
So I think this would apply to Niger more than Chad, because most people using human smuggling services in Chad are men. There are very few women who would be traveling to the gold mining areas. There may be some women who would, be traveling to southern Libya, but these are, very small numbers. So in Niger, one risk obviously related to women who are using human smuggling services are sex trafficking risks. The routes between Nigeria and southern Libya that involve quite sophisticated networks that operate, on these bypass routes that I mentioned. Actually, I don't think we can say a majority, because the we don't really have access to, very consolidated data in terms of exactly how many people are being transported through this route and the gender breakdown. But what we know from interviews with passeurs who operate on this route is that women actually constitute a very significant portion of the people who are being transported. And most of these women are from Nigeria and they are traveling to Libya. There are significant risks of sex trafficking due to, on the one hand, the prevalence of travel on credit. So many of these women are actually traveling on credit, and this obviously makes them quite vulnerable to human trafficking. They will not necessarily have knowledge or control over what conditions the reimbursement of this credit will involve, and in many cases it will involve sex trafficking. So I'd say this is a very significant risk. On the other hand, there are also the other human trafficking dynamic that involves women is the trafficking of women and children from southern areas in Niger to Algeria for forced begging. So these are so the women and children can be recruited in the southern regions and transported to Algeria, where they're forced to beg. And these women and children are also among the people who were expelled from Algeria if they're rounded up. So that's quite a significant risk too. Those are the two situations that come to mind for me involving women. There's also sex trafficking to Niger, which doesn't involve further travel to Libya. And this sex trafficking can take place so in sort of key cities, but also in gold mining areas, not in the gold fields themselves, but in the towns that often house the processing plants. And so the towns that service the gold fields, these areas where we will see an important sex work activity, which in some case actually involves women who have been trafficked.
Thank you very much, Alice. I think that was a really detailed answer to the question. I also see in the chat that the study that was mentioned by Emmanuel, the links is available, so you can click and have access to the Nigeria smuggling report. And I see another question for Alice again. Are some of the people smuggled to Algeria intending to be smuggled onwards to Spain on the Western Mediterranean route? I don't know if you can answer this question.
So yes, actually, what we know from the monitoring of human smuggling to Algeria is that so many migrants are just traveling to Algeria and they aim to work there for some time, and they don't necessarily involve movements across the Mediterranean. But we're seeing increasingly migrants who are traveling to Algeria and then onwards to either Tunisia or to Morocco. And in most cases, they are aiming to cross the Mediterranean, so either from the Moroccan coast or the Tunisian coast. And so this is actually something that's developed over the last year or so, and we're seeing increasing movements from Algeria to Tunisia, which is contributing to the high numbers of departures from Tunisia. So yes, that's quite a significant route at the moment.
Thank you very much again, Alice, for this detailed answer. I don't think I see any further questions. So I think with this, we can now we have now come to an end of the session. So again, I would like to express my really sincere gratitude to the distinguished speaker, to you, Alice, to Emmanuel, for your insightful and really practical remark today. I also want to thank the organizer of this conference on global organized crime, also for their support in organizing this session. Before closing, I don't know if Alice or Emmanuel want to also say a few words.
Thank you, Alexandre, and thanks everyone for the really interesting questions. I don't have anything to add, but if you would like to read more about any of the findings that I presented, we published this year a series based on the monthly human smuggling and trafficking monitoring program. So there are reports on Libya, Niger, Morocco, Chad, Tunisia, etc. So these are all available on the GI's website. So I'll post the link. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Emmanuel. I don't know if you want to say also a few words.
Yes, it's just thanks from me to you and to other panelists and all of the participants for a very useful engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So I think we've come to an end. Thank you everyone again for your participation, for your questions. And this has been recorded. So again, if you miss some information, you can always come back and re-listen it. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a really good day.